Hartwell, McClelland, Iowa. Interview conducted by Dr. Charles Johnson, Director, Center for the Study of War and Society, on September 23rd, 1995, at the A Company, 7th Armored Infantry Battalion, 8th Armored Division reunion in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. Yeah, there we go.
Who is with you?
His name is John McManus.
Not a relative.
No.
Oh.
He's one of my students.
I see.
He's my assistant at the center, and he's working on his PhD, and he passed his general exams last fall.
Oh yeah.
And he does some of the interviews for me when I interview veterans, and his dissertation is going to be on the American combat soldier, combat infantryman in World War II.
Dissertation, you mean like
That's
the final test of his doctorate?
Right. It's the paper he has to write for his PhD.
Mm-hmm.
They run 250, 300 pages. And he'll use material from A Company people and a lot of other folks. And he's a good student, and he's...
Did you get him started in this?
Yeah. Well, he did his master's degree out in Missouri, at the University of Missouri. And he worked on some aspect of Americans in combat, and he wrote about a 90-page master's thesis.
Yeah,
and he heard about what we were doing at Tennessee. I knew a guy who was working with him, and he said, "You want to do a PhD in military history on what you're interested in? Why don't you contact Johnson over at Tennessee?" And
that's
see
the way things go after you get out of after you get your first 4 years and go to. We had a son that not in your field, but it's a field that is closed, and you got to know somebody somewhere to help you get in. And he's an agronomist, and he worked for, and it's our youngest son, and we've kind of followed them all, but he was the only one that took agronomy, and he thought he was going to come back to farm, but I wasn't quite ready, so he went to work for Asgrow, and he graduated initially. He got his bachelor's at Iowa State, and that was a good agricultural school. And he went to work for Asgrow, which is a seed company at Purdue, at Lafayette, Indiana. And he worked there for 3 or 4 years for them, and he could see that he was just going to be a flunky all his life. He needed a master's, but he didn't know how to go about to get it. But he got a job through them and through a mutual instructor there on a ranch in western Kansas, a big ranch, and he was consultant for that. And he found out that's what he wanted to do, more than just research in genetics. And he worked on that ranch for a couple of years, and there was a lot of responsibility, but the pay wasn't too good. And so he contacted the guy that they had basically to do their work, and he was working under, and this guy was a doctor at the University of Nebraska in agronomy. And he took our Charlie under his wing, and Charlie wasn't married yet, and he went back to the University of Nebraska and worked under him for 2 years and got his master's. And he started the business under that guy in a big territory that was just being vacated by somebody that couldn't make it go. He comes home during the summer and makes sure that I do a good job of farming, and that's necessary. He walks my fields. I don't have to walk anymore. He walks every 10 acres of every farm he's got, and that's about 30,000 acres that he manages for, which doesn't seem like much. It's just like I don't have anything to do anymore.
Well, that's
I mean, he runs it through a computer, he runs it through the doctor, and I get printouts, and I'm told from week to week whether it ought to be herbicide control or, in my case, pray for rain, because I don't have irrigation. And I'm, he's changed the method of farming for me. He's also cost me some equipment change. Anyhow, that's what, I know you don't have time for all of my books, but I've got, and there's one guy that flies a plane. He's a retired general from Offutt. He couldn't afford the plane after he retired, so he's told to give it to
the Confederate
Air Force, and then they maintain it. But in doing so, he has to go nationwide to air shows and promotions, and he always takes a mechanic with him. So he's got about 6 like my son. And they took a gas tank out from behind the pilot seat, made another seat, another set of controls even, and so he goes about once every 6 weeks somewhere.
That's a wonderful airplane.
Well, they dive bomb us about once a month. We're out in the country, and we both are together, so that naturally they're doing it for Mark, but we're 200 yards from them. Now they come down on us, and even if, well, sometimes he's in it, you know. It's quite a thrill, especially if you don't know it's coming. I mean, they can throw you to the ground, and he will be. This general is, I wouldn't say he's careless, because he's got 12,000 hours in it, and and he flew jets in Korea, and he's old enough to be retired, but he didn't fly in World War II. And we've met him a few times. He's even offered me a ride, but I haven't gone
Just to
yet.
stay on the ground.
Yeah, he does charge $400 if you want to take a 15-minute ride, and he has every Saturday when he's home. He has 3 or 4, and he always shows them our roof from close up.
Real close up.
Yeah. So that's another boy, and I got 3 other boys that wouldn't care to do that. See?
But one of them's interested in things military.
Yeah, right. He's got an arsenal. You know, it's legal. He's an NRA member and does a lot of hunting. We have a farm that has good hunting on it. We have a very fertile farm, but we also have ditches through it that have a lot of cover, and we will eventually farm my farm, which
Is he the one who was living in the house?
Yeah, he lives in the house.
Picture?
Yeah. And he's got a son who's junior in high school, and he wants to go to ag school, and so, you know, I mean, things evolve like that.
Is that you were living in when you went off to war?
Yeah. Yeah.
That was back in
43.
43.
Early 43. I had no brothers, so it was kind of for me to come back to it. I wouldn't have had to. I worked after I got out of school in 42. I knew I was going to go. I knew I wanted to go. I had friends and neighbors that were going.
Out of high school?
Out of high school. Yeah, I never went to college. I got out in spring of 42. I did have an advantage over most of those that went in. When the division was formed, it had a basic cadre of maybe 10% of the men. I would imagine 1,500 out of the 15,000 were cadre. Would that be a reasonable, something like that, probably 1 in 10.
For that.
And those guys had already gone through basic and advanced training, and they were all, they all were non-coms. We didn't have any private PFCs come in as cadre.
Right.
But when I came in, it wasn't my first choice. I wanted to be a pilot just like everybody else, but my eyes weren't good enough. And
Where did you do your basic training?
Camp Oak.
Camp Oak?
Yeah. But when I came in, I had 3 years of high school ROTC. Now, most people didn't have that, but I was still strong for that. It wasn't college ROTC, and it didn't get you a commission, but it got you into college ROTC.
Right.
But it also made me a non-com immediately. I never had KP,
Right.
full guard duty, and it immediately made me a leader. And I had a certain military poise that they didn't get. Even though I was just a high school student, I wore a uniform 3 days a week for 3 years. I knew how to wear a uniform. And
You handle a weapon?
oh yeah, we had close order drill and manual of arms, and we knew how to march in a parade, and it was mandatory.
Right.
It was either that in high school or you had to take physical training, and those kids were looked down on.
Yeah, the same in my high school up in northern Michigan. I
Okay.
had 3 years of our high school
and
ROTC.
you might not have thought it did you any good.
Oh, no,
but
I
it
swear
did.
that it did.
You bet. Well, we had one son that never had that opportunity in high school because they had quit that program. But when he got into college, he decided he wanted ROTC, and he stayed at Iowa State and got his master's, and he was unit colonel when he graduated, and they offered him a regular Army commission because he had excelled, and they picked about, I don't know, I think, I don't think there was anybody else in the school, but we we did go with him to General Great Neighborhood's office when he was Joint Chiefs of Staff in the Pentagon, and our son and 3 others were there representing 4 districts in the United States, and they each got a $500 bond and a Sword of Honor, and that was quite an honor to meet the general that day.
Oh, indeed.
They let the families come too, along with Brown Thurman. He'd been there 30 years and he's still there.
Yeah,
But he was there. I remember that day. I talked to him.
Now, so when you went into the service, you were familiar with at least some of the things that they were teaching people.
I thought I knew a lot more than I did. I mean, I thought that I knew, but I found out that the tactics that we had been taught that I might have remembered were cavalry tactics from the 30s and the 20s. You know, like park your horses downstream when you park for the night. And that was, and I, being a farm boy, I had a little different education than some. I was raised on a farm. I knew how to work. I mean, on my weekends when I'd come home from school, because I lived quite a ways from town, and I lived in town during the week in a boarding room. And but I'd get up 5 o'clock Saturday and Sunday morning, but not Monday morning, to help do the milking, and I was used to working, and that work habit helped a little bit.
Do you think that people with a farming background have a little easier time adapting to the military
I think
when they go
so.
in?
I think so. I talked to some of my friends when they came back, and they felt like I did. It wasn't that we had any desire to stay. I had no desires afterwards to stay in the Army. In fact, there was quite a pitch, as I recall, at Camp Grant for those, especially non-coms. I come back as a tech sergeant. And I certainly didn't, but there was 100 guys in front of me and 100 guys behind me, and I don't think of those 200 guys that went through that indoctrination for a couple hours, I don't think they got one of them. And still there's guys here that I know did that. But I had some place to come back to. I had a wedding to look forward to, and I had a promise of some land to farm. It wasn't my farm, it was close by, from a good friend and neighbor who didn't have a son, and he promised me if I came back I could farm his farm as long as I wanted to, which was a couple years until my father decided to quit.
It made room for you on your
Right,
your
and
own
that's when I moved into this house,
Uh-huh.
and we lived in that house until 1977 when I had the son that's in there now got married, and we didn't want to move to town like my father did. And he didn't stay there long. We built another house for him eventually, but it wasn't available when I got married, or when our son got married. So we have 4 homes on our 320-acre farm, which is it can absorb them.
Sure.
It cannot provide for them. It can't. I mean, but the community can absorb it. We don't want anybody else in our valley, you know. Yeah. But that's about my background.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Were you assigned right out of basic training to the 8th Armor, or?
No, I didn't go. As soon as I was inducted, I went to the 8th Armor.
Oh, uh-huh.
They took 12,000 recruits that had never had basic training. We took our basic training with, they were all recruits, including myself. And that's why there was a position for me in leadership. Minor leadership,
Yeah,
but at least in
but
leadership.
sure.
I mean, when the guys were worried about close order drill or manual of arms or taking the gun apart, I'd had it all. And some of the category we had were pretty hard to talk to. And I know the guys in my squad didn't go anywhere but to me. It wasn't long before they caught up to me, and many of them passed me. But at least you felt a comradeship.
Right.
There was it tied us together somewhat. And they knew that I wasn't any better than they were, so they knew they could do it. It wasn't, and they knew that I didn't have any authority to put them on KV or to even holler at them, see?
But at the same time, they could learn from you and.
Oh, sure, they could learn from me.
Right.
Yeah, but not all of them wanted to. Yeah, we had some lazy guys that they didn't want to learn. It was something against their principle to learn anything about the Army. And that was one of the advantages of the way they took care of the division a year later. When we come off of bivouac, we were trained. We had our field training. We had basic to start with for 6 months, and then we took field training. And this was like in March, and I'm sure you got it everywhere on your tapes, but in March of 44, after I'd been in the year, they needed replacements, as you know, and they needed them bad, and they needed them trained. They had not only had to have basic, but they also had to have advanced training. And there was a ripe group of men ready for them. And they also got some that weren't the best.
So they called out some of the people from 8th?
They took all of our privates and PSEs out of our infantry division. I think they did the same in tanks and artillery too, but we were allowed to keep a few, and we kept some prime ones.
Well, it's logical. You keep the best, and you
Yes,
you let
but we
go
had a
of the
quota that we got rid of more than we wanted to,
ones.
but at the same time, we got some wonderful men back in.
We're okay. It just stopped for a second. I have it here so I can keep an eye on it.
I
to
see.
if
Okay.
it keeps turning.
It isn't.
But this was in early, the spring of 44, that
Right.
you moved some out, and then they got ASTP people. Did you have any air cadet people that had, because that was about the same time, they took a lot of people out of the air cadet program.
That's right. Those that we figured had washed. But maybe they didn't wash. Maybe they just. We didn't talk about that too much. They were there. They had to kind of accept their fate, and they figured it that way. But many of them adapted well, and they were good guys to be with. Well, we went through another 6 months of field training with them. They had already had basic. We kind of resented that until we found out, about the time we started, that D-Day was there, and the other guys were in battle. So it was kind of like, we wanted to be there. Well, we were glad we weren't.
It's not your choice, and you can
That's
feel
right.
it.
We didn't have anything to say about it, so it wasn't like we needed to be ridiculed for it. But at times, we kind of felt like the division wasn't going to get the recognition when we did go in. And we were, even when the war was over, we had to know that 8th Armored was one of the lesser appreciated divisions of the Armored Corps.
Yeah, you weren't committed to combat until January, but again, that was nobody's doing.
That's
Nobody's
right,
fault.
and it didn't make it any easier.
Right. Oh yeah. I mean, January of 45 was plenty tough
Right,
work.
but December was worse.
Yeah.
December was worse. And, after the first week in battle, I think that was probably the worst, and I missed most of that. I was injured about the third night in a building that was blown in.
Artillery hit the building.
Well, it was Green and Mamie's, but yes, artillery hit. I'm sure they had a forward observer close enough that he could just point to it. It was like it was about 4 in the morning, and I was a squad leader.
First
Peter,
platoon, second platoon,
third.
third platoon.
Peters was my platoon sergeant, and Boat was the platoon leader. Captain Finley was the captain.
Had Finley been the captain for quite a long time?
Quite a long time. We came over with him. It seems like we had somebody between him and Cook. But originally, when I went in 43, Captain Charles Cook was the company commander. I'm not too sure he was well liked by the echelon above him, because we got some details that we shouldn't have gotten it. But at the level that I was, you don't know what's going on. In fact, even during a battle, you don't know much above your own echelon. If you read that letter last night, Lieutenant Pickett had come in when we were in Willery. Maybe I shouldn't get ahead of that, but it was just,
Yeah, we can wait on that. Let's get you.
but get me out of the action.
The first action.
Yeah.
How did you feel? Do you remember how you felt when you realized that this was really it? You were going to be committed to a combat situation.
It dawned on me when I was offered extra muncheon the night before. Gee whiz, I'm Catholic, and I can't. General absolution. All right, and there was more Catholics in the unit that night than I ever thought there was. They took us into a little hall. It was hardly lit. We were probably about a mile from the line, and we're just advancing through, I think, the 94th, or who in the hell was it?
94th.
I believe
was
so.
in there.
And we come out of that little hall, and there was a couple trucks along the side of the road, and we were forming up in a broken line to move forward, and but we still hadn't moved yet. And these two guys got out of the truck, and they was pointing back right near where I was standing, and we got talking to the truckers, and they asked them what they were hauling, and they said, "Oh, take a look." And I don't know anybody else you've ever talked to that did it, but I and the two other guys went over and lifted up the tailgate, or the back flap on that. Yeah, maybe it had K-Rassenter or something. It was full of dead soldiers, and they were a cemetery crew. I don't know whether they're a cemetery crew, but they were a recovery
Grave
crew.
registration,
And they had,
something.
yeah, and these guys were frozen in grotesque positions, and I realized then, you know, and that word passed through the whole outfit. I'm not sure everybody saw him, but it was very similar to an experience later that we had when we went into our first concentration camp. And we didn't see one of the major ones, but we saw minor ones. And the people that were there were all but dead, and the guards were gone, but they were dead laying around too. And you just couldn't imagine that it could have been that bad. We didn't know. We heard about it. We thought that it might be, but we never thought we'd see anything like that. Well, I never.
Do you remember the name of that particular camp that you saw? Did it have a name?
Well, we overrun it, but then it really wasn't an action. I mean, it just happened to be there, and it wasn't like
In
we had
the
to
way.
fight our way in.
Mhm.
The
Right.
guards were gone,
Right.
and we went through it too fast. We left a few men there, and men from battalion came and kept those corralled because they were wild. I remember they were eating potatoes that were rotten, and we had seen enough by then that we were a little harder to it. It didn't bother me. It just made me mad.
People could do that to other people?
That's right, yeah. I didn't dwell on this, and some of these things are a little fuzzy after 50 years, but there are some of those things that are quite vivid, and I don't dream about them often. But there for a while, I woke up in the middle of the night screaming. My wife said I did. I never threatened her in bed, but I mean, there were some that said they did. They were hard to live with for a while. I know my dad and mother said that they could hear me scream and jump at night occasionally. My dad was in the service, but he never fought. In fact, he knew General Devine when he was in World War I. My dad was farming a homesteaded farm in Colorado. He was an oldest son he had 6 brothers on the farm where this house is. But my grandfather wanted him to go to Colorado and homestead 160. And he was like 21. And he was there farmed 2 years, and he got the harvest in the fall of 17. And he went into the service, and he went to OCS at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and it was a big class. And he eventually was first lieutenant of a platoon of that class, which was a pretty good plum.
Yeah.
But the colonel was a young cadet by the name of John M. Devine.
Divine.
And he knew him well enough. They weren't together too long. And I think General Devine a bit later might have gone to probably never got in service. I mean, he never got in war because my dad didn't. He never got overseas.
Right.
But I think he probably went on to West Point afterwards.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Right.
And then he ends
Otherwise,
up
he wouldn't have
commanding
been a
Yeah. And he ends up commanding your division.
Yeah, right. And I met the general one day, and I forget the name of this town too, but I was in reserve with my platoon. At that time, I was platoon sergeant, and I was in the reserve. It was a town where we lost a couple men it was near the pillboxes, and we took a pillbox that day, finally, and Lieutenant Hammerschmidt was killed by a by a mine that he shot. He was riding in a Jeep, and he shot down on the ground. He had a couple Germans on the front of the Jeep, and it killed both of them, and it killed him. and it was in that same town that the general did the line to see what was going on, and he tapped me on the shoulder and wanted to know what was going on in hell. I said, General, I don't know. I've been told to sit right here with my men. And I had him in a house, and it was before we moved out. And I mentioned to him the name Hartwell, and now whether he remembered or not, he said he did. You know,
Probably.
chances are he did, because it was kind of a small knit group, you know.
Sure.
And I remember name, and that would have been 30 years before, and I can remember names that were prominent to me, although his name would have been more prominent to my father than my father's would have been to him. But he
but they
was
were
a general
together
man.
early in the
He
war.
was- there was a little tie together, you know.
Right. As close as you ever came to the general. I
That's the
imagine.
closest I ever came to him, you know. I met Patton under about the same circumstances.
Uh-huh.
When he spoke to me, you know, but I didn't speak back. I had appendicitis attack after the war was over, and I was sent away from my unit and had my appendix taken out at Pilsen. And after I recovered after I left the hospital, they sent me to the 81st Division to come home with them because I lost my point, put me in with them if I wanted to go with them. And so I recuperated at Linz, Austria, and during that recuperation I wasn't required to do anything. But being an old farm boy, I knew how to ride a horse. Every farm boy can ride an old horse. In fact, I had a pretty good one at home. And so I got a horse out of the stables, and I was riding down a little narrow street in a town. The street wasn't any wider than this room. And 2 motorcycles with 3 stars on them and a squad car, and then a command car comes through, and the guys in the motorcycle stopped and they said, "Hold your horse, get off the way." And so I got off, and just about that time the general come by alongside, and his window was open because they had to slow almost to a stop. And he said, "Hang on to that horse, son." That was it. That was all contact.
He liked horses.
Oh, you bet he did.
Yeah, he had polo ponies.
Right. Well, I'm sure he. Anyhow, things like that
They stay
impressed
with
me,
you,
you know. And still, I knew I was not legal where I was. I was supposed to be recuperating and not on a horse out there jogging around. But he didn't ask me what I was doing.
Oh,
Come in,
sorry.
come in.
We just got to look for a telephone book. You don't know. They don't have that, George. They don't have it. Hotels with that telephone.
I'm in confession here. I'm getting a hell of a penance.
Yeah, we were talking about that the night that all you Catholics got extreme unction that night.
Right.
And that must have been eerie too.
Even that was eerie because I never
Yeah.
had it before. I guess if you have faith, well, you think, and I do. But I was young then, coming from a devout family. My mother was Irish. My father was English and had been from a Mormon background, and eventually goes back about 19 generations. We traced my Hartwell name to the Mayflower, third flight, and our ancestors were had a tavern right outside of Concord, between Concord and Lexington. The home is still there. The old tavern is still there, preserved.
Go back a long way.
Hey, I get in the front row. They held it open for us. We got there a little after 5 o'clock, and the lady that was a ranger at that little site, you know, and she said, "Why do you want to see it?" And I said, "Well, my name is Hartwell, and back about 17 generations it started here." And she said, "I'm going to give you the whole tour." She stayed there for an hour and a half with my family. So that impressed the kids a little bit.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
that will. No, so
Where were we?
you were sort of within the sound of the artillery, and as these 2 trucks came by with the bodies in them.
Right.
That must have. I've heard other people say the same kind of thing the first time they see American dead. That,
Right.
there's
Shortly
something
after
that
that,
happens to you.
right, it didn't make me, I wasn't fatalistic about it, but it made me realize why we were there before we got in action. Then about probably 10 minutes later, we were stringing out along the ditch from where they had been, from where they had come, And the word came back, and I was in the 3rd platoon, 2nd squad, 3rd platoon. We were going up 1st, 2nd, 3rd. And they called back for all bazookas. Well, bazookas and the loaders had to get up and go forward. And it was like, goodbye, friend, never see you again, see? Well, within 2 hours, they were all back again, or we were up to them. But that was probably, as following what we had seen, that was devastating too. And because I had a couple men in my squad that went with them too, and there was, I don't know if they ever found a target or not.
Well,
But
there
that
was something
was,
bad up ahead.
that's right. And then, then when we got up there that night, I thought it was poor tactics, but I didn't want to be alone. And the whole company went into a building. Hell, if they'd have known it, they could have blown the whole company up. And we were in that building until daybreak. Then we spread out a little bit, and we had some narrow escapes that day.
From artillery mostly, or?
From snipers and artillery. I was in a church, along with Peters, my squad. We were in there until about midnight, and a Tiger tank come up and stuck its barrel in the church itself. And they got out and came in. And we were in the front part of the church in the pews. And I'd just been to church the night before, and it sure didn't look right to blow that church up. But we threw grenades at them right out in the middle of the pews and took out the back vestibule. And after having thrown a grenade at the tank, and it just popped off of it. So even after we threw a grenade at it and popped off, they come in the church. I thought, what kind of crazy men are these? I don't know how many of them. The way they screamed, we killed a couple. Then we found out later they had a man in the steeple. And he was up there all night. He was in the steeple in the belfry. Got him out. Somebody shot him the next day. But that was after I left. We left there.
Did they pull the tank back out again, or did the tank stay there?
That tank was there by morning. Somebody had got a bazooka in it, but we didn't have bazooka. And so I don't know who got it. We pulled out of there into the back, and that tank never fired in the church, but it was ready to. I think those men didn't know where that grenade came from, and they went in to get their man out, probably.
Maybe so. But
I
odd that they'd gotten out of the tank and.
Well, they might have had infantry alongside the tank.
Maybe that's it.
Yeah, but it was pitch dark. Maybe it was cloud cover. There was no moon, and you couldn't see a hand in front of your face. And
It must have been scary.
yeah, I was scared that night. But so was everybody else, I guess. I didn't have an opportunity to shoot my rifle that night, but we did throw a couple of grenades. You didn't just shoot at nothing. It was the next day that we were in. We had a couple battles during the day, enough so that, I'm not sure I shot anybody that day, but I sure as hell know I missed a couple because it kept running. Funny things do happen too. The next morning we were advancing, and I had a squad leader yet, and the squad leader of 1st Platoon was name was Paul McCullough, and we had taken the backyard of a house, and then the street, and then the front yard of another house, and got in the backyard, and there was a separate cave, and it had a door on it that opened up out. We didn't know what was in that, but we were getting pretty trigger happy, and he took a concussion grenade and threw down there and slammed the door shut and laid against the door. And I blew that door off about 10 foot, but not enough to hurt him too bad. and everybody laughed, including Paul. And at that same time, there was probably 7 or 8 Germans along the other side of a wall. They were dressed in white, running as fast as they could from right to left. And it was just like a shooting gallery. And I had my whole squad. They were just going like that. Never one of them dropped. Not a one of them dropped. Right there. And we all wondered what the hell, but we were all excited. We weren't taking careful aim. And it wasn't by then that we didn't want to kill. It just didn't happen. It wasn't as easy as you thought it was going to be. See, and there was a couple other events that day, but I can't really recall how they happened or but I could tie that together, and mainly because I remember Paul flying through the air.
Was this in Menig?
Yes, it was in Menig.
This was in
About the
Menig.
second morning we were there. Then that night, I don't know where we'd been up till dark. I can't remember where we had retreated some, I know. And there was a street to the front of the church. The street went lengthways out of town. And we had nearly everything on the left side, looking north I would say it would be. Everything on the left side was ours. And everything on the right side, you didn't know what was there because we were getting firing from all directions there. But we owned everything on the left side. And there was, behind those row of houses, was well, you'd call it an alley here, but it was only about this wide. And it led between each house, and it led up to the street, and the company command post was right at the end of that, just not too far from the church. And platoon leader, I didn't see a platoon leader. I don't know what happened, but he wasn't there. But Peters was there and had at least 2 squads with him, and I was one of them. And we took Occupy clear at the end of that block. And I remember that night we were supposed to be in hiding. We were supposed to. We had I had my whole squad in one room, and another squad too, and we were standing guard outside. And I had 2 guys with me, and I think it was like between 2 and 3 we were standing, because the hell everybody else was tired, and we had to have some sleep. And maybe it was 3 to 4 that I and these 2 guys stood guard, and we just got off guard, and I got 3 more guys up there to watch the windows and the doors. We laid down on a kind of board floor, but had a little, and everybody else was asleep in the room, and we crept in there. We knew where the 3 guys come from that that replaced us. One of them was Joe Cortelli, and he was a very good friend. He could sure as hell cook. We had just liberated a goose, and we'd had it just before we moved out. He was a good Catholic and went to church with me that night. He was in my squad. He laid alongside of me, and a guy by the name of Luckfield was on the other side of me, and he was in my squad. And we hadn't been there probably more than 10 or 15 minutes. Maybe they were asleep. I wasn't asleep. And screaming made me hit back, and then it hit the front, and just about that quick, boom, boom, boom. And it hit right over our heads, and it killed them. But I was laying on my stomach, and I had my helmet on. They were on their back, and they had their helmets on. Their guns along their side, but they were laying on their back, and it suffocated them or what, I don't know. It didn't knock me out, but the pressure was tremendous, and the pain was, well, it was bearable. It didn't knock me out. I mean, I was conscious, and I knew I couldn't move, and I couldn't breathe, but my arms were kind of like this. My head was like this, and I could wiggle my feet. And Bob Johnson was my assistant squad leader. Bedlam was in that room. The guys were screaming, and I could hear that, but I was paralyzed. I was under rubble pile that had come down over me, and he pulled me out. I could feel him pulling, and he knew where I was, and he pulled me, and he said, John, you okay?" And I mumbled something, and he got me out, and I don't know why Bob did it. Bob just took me in his arms and took me up this path and took me to the aid station. And when I got there, I could start to move a little bit. It had a hell of a pain. I didn't, I don't know how much pressure would have been, but it would have taken quite a bit, because Bill Crocker came to help relieve the bedlam in that, and they unloaded that pile of rock and got the 2 bodies out, and they found my helmet, and it was crushed sideways. And he told me later he never figured I'd come back. They took me to aid station, and I don't remember, except that I saw a guy by the name of John Coulter who was in my squad. I didn't know what happened to him, but I lost him like 2 hours before this happened, and he must have gone berserk, because he was having, and he never came back, but he was sitting alongside of me, and we talked a little bit, but he didn't go where I went, and I didn't have any blood. They didn't send me back. They sent me back to battalion, and this Red Soul in here. He was there. I remembered he was, but I didn't know what was the matter with him. Apparently he was a mechanic or a driver, and he got something in his eye, and his eye was all puffed up. So they sent him back.
Yeah, I think it was brake fluid or something.
Brake fluid or something, but he was like that, but I don't remember that. All I know is Red took care of me, and I was in that room for 4 or 5 days and never moved. There was no German lady that fed me hot milk, changed my pants, and all of a sudden, about 3 or 4 days, I was recovered. And
That's amazing.
yeah, I mean, not that I was really glad to be back, but I was glad to be back. And I went to the unit that night. Now this was strange too. The night before we went to Nenning, we stayed in a little town, probably 3 or 4 miles back, and I don't know these names, but I'm sure it's somewhere in there. It's irrelevant about the names. But when we went into that town, we thought we were getting awful close. The captains had us on 1 hour on and 2 hours off guard duty, which it was, hell, there was 75 men on guard duty around this little town all night. You couldn't move without having somebody challenge you. And I had it wasn't in my squad, but in the squad within the platoon, we had a guy by the name of Carbone, I remember. He was assistant squad leader, I think the machine gun squad. And he went to sleep on post. And he was threatened court-martial right on the spot. I thought they were going to kill him. And he proved himself pretty well during Nenning, apparently. When I came back, Nenning was over. They had just come back, and I walked down the company street. The command post the CP was in the same place. I walked into that unchallenged, and and the captain said, "Go down and take over the platoon because Peters is gone."
Peters had been hurt.
Peters had been hurt during that 3 days. He got shrapnel wounds, and he did come back. In fact, he wasn't back too long, and then they sent him away because they gave him a battlefield, which left me with the platoon. And I was his assistant most of the time. Even in the States, he and I were good friends, and he wanted me as his assistant. And so naturally, it was kind of assumed that I would be. I wouldn't have to been. That I would move up, and that's where I stayed in the rest. He came back once in a while, but he never came back to third platoon.
I imagine the captain was glad to have you back.
It wasn't the same captain, but no, Captain Finley was hurt. He'd gone too, as I recall. And I don't know who it was, McKenna, McCaffrey, and I don't know which, but there was no doubt. Oh, sure, he wanted me. And the men wanted me, I guess.
Yep, sounds like it.
Yeah, I suppose it did. I remember a very strange thing. The only one that might have resented it at all was the squad leader of first squad, and his name was McCullough. And I got off to the wrong start with him. When I walked in the room, they had just got rations, and the rations included a watch. I had my watch. Squad leaders had watches. He had a watch too, but he wanted another one. So he kept the second watch. And I hadn't been there more than 5 minutes, and they were all congratulating. And then a couple of them say, "Hey, McCullough kept the damn best thing in the ration for himself, and it, was free." And I said, "Well, now that can't be. We can't start out that way. We're going to have a drawing. Pick a number." And there was about 20 men left in the platoon there. We hadn't got a replacement yet. And guess who won the watch? McCullough. So we got his damn watch, and everybody else was satisfied, but he was pissed off at me. But I knew it was right,
Right.
And we never had any trouble. Paul always did what he was told to do. And but I guess I had never contacted him since. Pete tried to, and he wouldn't talk to him.
He told me about that.
I see. He told me he was at Bradford, PA. I knew he was from Bradford, PA, and he stopped there. The guy was in the factory and didn't want to come and talk to him.
Yeah, Pete said that he asked the foreman went upstairs, supervisor went upstairs and came down and said he doesn't want to talk to him.
Yeah.
But
well, that would be a turnoff, wouldn't it?
Yeah, really. And apparently Dick told me that he had written to him afterwards and said that he was sorry that McCulloch wouldn't talk to him, but that Pete had no hard feelings, and that he was just sort of wanting to chat with him. And Dick said that one night, a few weeks later, he got a phone call from McCulloch.
Oh.
And McCulloch said, you know, he said, I got kind of a bad conscience about refusing to see you, because we went through a lot together. He said, but for me, the war is over, and he doesn't have very many.
An arsenal, really. I remember at one time before I left Pilsen, and then we knew that we could only take one home.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a Luger, and I had two Lugers. One of them was a 1942 model, the other was a 1919, and it was in the best shape. I had another one with a short stock, metal stock, kind of a web stock, and a long barrel. The barrel was that long. And it was clumsy. I guess I should have kept it, but I didn't. I traded it. I had a P-38, and I had a 32 Walther, and I had a little nickel-plated handgun, and all at one time. And I really didn't. I wasn't hunting for them, but I didn't. I remember I found that little nickel-plated handgun, 25 caliber. In the bottom of a foxhole, right shortly after I was denied by that guy when we went back down there. Little Joe, and I forget his last name, he was our medic. And
Did each platoon have a medic? Or
Yeah.
Each platoon
Mhm.
had a medic.
his name, Erdinger or Messenger or something like that. The little Joe hung to me like I was glue, like he was. I mean, he was going through shock. And for a couple of weeks, he never left my side. He was, I felt very secure having a medic, but I wasn't far from the men either. But he followed me on he was by my side on every attack we ever made.
Was there anything particular that shocked him, that made him particularly troubled?
I think so, because he had to handle some pretty gruesome. He was left with men that were dying, and all of a sudden his nerves were getting to him. And he was with me where we advanced down through the valley, and but we didn't have any contacts. We could see where they'd been, and there were some foxholes down there. We looked at those foxholes, just checking them out if there was somebody in it, and this gun was at the bottom of it. And I remember he being alongside me. I said, I'll get that gun for you, but let's take our time. Let's clear the area first, and we'll come back. We didn't know whether it was booby-trapped. I mean, you always thought of those things, and still I never did find one booby-trapped. But you don't always find them in the bottom of a foxhole like that either.
Yeah.
It was strange. And he made me come back and get it, but he didn't want it. He didn't want it, so I put it in my pocket. And I said, well, Joe, if whatever you want it, well, you can have it. And he never wanted it. He might have got another gun sometime. I don't remember seeing him much longer after that. His memory just fades from me. But he was pretty important. He was kind of like your little brother. He was small in stature, and God, he'd do anything for you. Not that you'd ask him to. But once in a while he was in the way, too.
Little brothers are like that.
Yeah.
But his job was to patch people up, and I'm sure that was hard after a while. But,
That's right. Right. I don't think he was a real strong character. He was a little too babyish, a little too young for his job. He didn't take command of anything. I mean, he could call for a jeep and a medic, and he could give you, morphine, or he maybe could put on a tourniquet, give you a little comfort if you needed it. And that was his job. He was mainly to make contact to get you out. And see, it had just been an hour or two before that we lost a man. And I don't know. I remember that was strange too. Somebody else right beside me lost their trenching tool. It was split right off their leg, and the splinters went into the leg, but didn't draw blood. It knocked the hell and gone,
Yeah.
And you weren't expecting fire, and all of a sudden, but this guy got it in the jaw too there, and he was a point, and the point man is generally the one that got it, and he was out on point. His name was Bull Durham. He was from Carolina somewhere, and we called him Bull because why not?
Yeah.
And he was a good scout. I had a couple others that were more willing and more careless, and they came all through it. This Ray Guido, this Guido actually, and he should have been here, but he's in Italy with his wife today, and we've been to his house. He lives in Utica. He was my runner, and confident. He would do anything, and hurry back. It wasn't always that they would hurry back. Now, it wasn't like you were telling him to do the impossible, but he was there when you needed him, and he would go out and point, and he would be careful, but he moved, and so you could all move him. But a lot of instances like that, you move until somebody hears something or does something or sees something or gets shot. Yeah, and you prefer that it was one of the other two or three, and most often it was, unless you were really tied up and you couldn't move. But then you didn't need scouts out.
Right.
Then they fell back where they belonged.
Could you tell the difference quickly as to the quality of the enemy unit that you were facing? Did you know pretty well whether these were good, experienced troops or people who weren't very good?
I don't know whether you could distinguish that right away, but it didn't take long. If they give up, they were Warmock. We assumed they were all
SS?
They were all SS. After the first week, I think they were, but they weren't. A lot of them were pretty meek. A lot of them wanted to give up. After we got, even in the pocket, there was a time up in Holland that they didn't want to give up very bad, but as far as I'm concerned, the issue was over after we crossed the Rhine. Even though we had to be careful and even though we had to fight, the issue was solved, and it was just a matter of time for us to get there.
Of doing it.
Get it done, right. I didn't question leadership as much after we got that far either. Not that I knew anything about it, but no, I comfortable with the way things went afterwards, even though we lost a man, But there was times when I could make some decisions where I thought I could save some men, and I did, and I could. I was always constantly aware of it. But their livelihood didn't center around being kept alive from gunfire. They had to be taken care of. I mean, they had to be controlled. They had to be out of harm's way, but they had to be ready, and they had to be fed, and you had to make sure that they didn't party too much, and you kept track of where they were so that they weren't off. We did lose one man, and hell, he was gone for a month, and he finally came back. Now, he said that he got lost from the crowd of the unit. I'm not sure. That's right. But he joined in and kept right on going again. He was a sergeant. in my platoon.
Well, maybe he was.
Maybe he was, and that, but he could have been drunk for 2 weeks too.
Maybe more likely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I heard somebody tell me about the time that you all came upon a warehouse full of liquor. I don't know if it was your platoon or not. But,
No, we did.
One of the platoons.
We had a good share of liquor, of wine in our the brackets we built on the back of our half tracks. I think that the drivers had a lot to do with that too. They were confiscating villages in the rear, and we never got into the cellars. We never were short on wine, and it was pretty good. But we didn't get drunk either. I mean, we kept our wits about us. There was strict rules against that and fraternization, and there weren't too many that abused it. There was always a few,
Oh, sure.
and
But not
there
too
was-
many in the company.
no, and there was never anything blatant. I mean, it wasn't like somebody would bring a girl into a crowd party. Once in a while, maybe somebody would sneak away and wonder where in hell it was, and you send his buddy to go get them, and they'd come back smiling. But most of the guys were pretty straight arrow. We had a couple that couldn't hold their drinks very well. We found out about that when I kind of turned blind overnight.
Oh.
Don't know what it was he drank, but he was all right in a couple of days.
Oh, okay, it wasn't permanent.
No, no.
You said something about the story that Pickett sent in, that your remembrance of that particular...
Okay, I wasn't aware of what the command was coming down. And you're familiar with the story that he wrote.
Mhm.
So I can talk from there instead of having to repeat
Right.
any of that. I didn't know the command from, and the coordination between artillery and division and combat command. I do remember a few things that happened an hour or two before, and we kind of settled in. We knew that, I don't remember the half-tracks coming up and then leaving with our baggage. Hell, they'd have made so much noise up where we were. They weren't there. They might have been back a mile, and we left them, and because we were on foot coming up.
Uh-huh.
This ditch and this field he's talking about, I don't remember him being with me. He might have gone with me part way. He had never been in action before. This was it for him. There might have been a few little skirmishes, but this was it for him. And he was, as far as I could see, he was put in charge of the company charge. And if it wasn't typical of the Pickett charge at Gettysburg, you'll never see anything that was. You would have been embarrassed, you would have laughed if you could have seen it. There were two mistakes made. Oh, the hell, there was more than two. First of all, we should have pushed off at 5 instead of 6 when it was dark yet. At 4 o'clock, I took 3 men and we walked up alongside of that. Well, it wasn't a road, it was a ditch, but it was bush. And I didn't get all the way into town with that patrol. I wasn't supposed to. I was supposed to be back by 5. And I got back about, probably took me 45 minutes. It was dark. It wasn't moonlight, but there were stars. And you can see a little bit after you become accustomed to it, even at stars. And so we picked our way up, and we found no opposition whatsoever, all the way up, almost up into town. And then was the time we should have taken the whole company up.
Called off the artillery barrage and just taken the company in there.
Well, hindsight, you know. Artillery barrage was impressive, but it was so far out in front. We should have been up there
Uh-huh.
and just had it in front of us.
I wondered about that when I was reading it, that,
And we
to
knew
go
that.
1,000 yards after artillery lifts, I mean, you got
That's
1,000
right.
yards and...
It took us, God, it took us hours to get up there. Everybody running at full speed. Craziest thing you ever saw. And Pickett in the back, run, go men, you know, and he'd never been in combat before. And the guy alongside him, he said, I'm going to shoot that son of a bitch. And I said, no, you're not. We're going to do this. Let's get the hell going and get this over with. We never had a fire. There was no 88 that shot to us. The only fire we had was from a couple machine guns behind that misfired and shot 2 of our men, one of which was a Pollock replacement that come in the day before and wanted to fight with us, and we give him a uniform, and he got it right in the back.
killed him?
Oh, yeah, yeah. Two men died right alongside of us. And that was the only firing. When we got up in the edge of town, we had to clean out some houses, and I remember a little bit, but it wasn't dramatic like he said about, we had a few give up, and one of them did, or two didn't want to, and we had to do some shooting. When we got up the railroad track, our mission was the railroad track between these two churches, and we were the only ones there, and I don't know where in the hell the rest of them, they got caught in some houses and were probably cleaning them out. There was a warehouse that we all fired from the hip at, but there wasn't nothing, no fire coming from it. And it was probably 300 yards away from the warehouse. But we were sure blazing coming up through there, and if we might have scared somebody that they didn't shoot at us, possible. Who knows? I mean, we were so fortunate that we didn't have any opposition. One machine gun could have just wiped us out. And so anyhow, we got up to the railroad track, and there was the Union Station, and that was Dorriston was a pretty good sized town, probably 20,000, I would just guessing from this look to the park that we were in. And the station was it was probably big as my hay barn at home, which is 100 by 60 feet, and big high roof in it, and no trains in the middle. But I mean, they were, and we went into that station. Well, before we got to the station, there were some foxholes out in between the tracks, and there was still firing from probably our own men on another sector, and we hit into those foxholes, and hell, we found dead soldiers in there, and they were American.
Dead American soldiers?
They were dead American soldiers. We got into the station, and there was a squad of men in there, and most of them were all wounded, and they were from another division. They had taken the damn town before the artillery barrage ever came in. And our own artillery barrage, had you ever heard this?
Not this story, but
Oh.
I've heard it happen, but not...
Well, but this happened, and we didn't take that town. We knocked out we took some Germans out of this street that we come up there, but they were just fringe compared to, if there was any coordination, that was a slaughter that shouldn't have happened. But that wasn't Pickett's fault. It wasn't Pickett's fault. But from then on, the men resented Pickett. They didn't want to trust him. And to this day, I know Ray Guido says that there was a couple of times when he was tempted. But, that my job was not to save him, but I wanted to. I didn't want to be the sole leader of that outfit either. He was put in there to do his job, and but I was probably, to a certain extent, a governor for him. I held him back from doing some crazy
really
things.
stupid.
Yeah, and I think he probably gave me credit for that. But and the men, I made it easier for him, I'm sure. He probably wouldn't have been very tolerant from their actions had he seen them. He shouldn't have been in this position, and that would have made things difficult. My life wasn't difficult, but I realized I had a different role than I had when Peters was there. I mean, Peters was a leader, and our lieutenant Vogt was too, but he didn't last long. He didn't come back from Nenning, and Peters did, so...
Was Vogt wounded in Nenning?
He must have been. I think he had frozen feet or something.
Well, a lot of that.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
Did Pickett learn as the weeks went on? Did he get any better, or?
Well, I don't think he ever would have learned too much.
Some people are like that.
Yeah. I mean, he might have known what his men's capabilities were. I mean, you can only put your man so much and he runs out of gas. But Pickett, I think he wanted to be a hero. And sometimes that's at the expense of somebody else. No. Peters never wanted to be a hero. but his men followed him, and it happened. And it was short-lived, but he had earned it, and nobody resented it. They would resent a new J-tail coming in that had never done anything like Pickett. And they wouldn't have resented anybody in the Union that got it, you know. I don't know. I suppose maybe I don't know when he left. It wasn't a big deal. I don't remember when he left the unit, and he might have been up. He might have been there clear to the end. I don't know. I just don't recollect anywhere. I wasn't responsible to him later on. I mean, I had my job, and I knew I was going home or going to Japan or somewhere, and it was only during that short period of time that I have vivid memories of him. You know, I really wasn't looking forward to see him, and he's not here,
Right.
but he'd come, and I didn't bring that flag for him anyhow.
You didn't. You hang on to that flag.
Well, my son said it's his.
Oh yeah.
Right.
But it's interesting.
I think the flag means more to my son now than ever,
Yeah.
but somebody else wanted it.
I can understand that. Did you trade for that flag, or did you
No,
find it?
no, I
You
took it
got
out the
yourself?
building.
Uh-huh.
But there was flags everywhere.
Oh, sure. The Germans were great for flags.
Oh, hell, they had flags everywhere. But it was taken down. It wasn't folded up.
Another question I had in taking prisoners, and you took quite a few. Ever any instances that you heard about or knew about where somebody had been fighting against you, and then at the very last minute decided that they were going to surrender, and the people didn't give them a chance to? I mean, I know that happens.
No, that never happened to me. I can remember taking prisoners that you were mad at, but you weren't mad at them when they got their guns down. And I never followed up on a prisoner. I sent a detail back with them. And my place was not to be worried about a prisoner. Once he was a prisoner, he was somebody else's. And I never sent one back with anyone that I knew was going to do anything to him. And I wouldn't have, because I wouldn't have probably cared so much about that prisoner as I would my man.
Your man, and how you would have felt about it too.
That's right. I would have been responsible for what he did, and I didn't want him to be responsible for what he did. I couldn't be responsible if he wasn't on a detail for me, though.
That's somebody else's problem.
That's him. But if he's a detail for me, then I'm responsible for him. I felt that. Not in a sense that I would talk about it. I guess I wouldn't have told him. I would have known, you know.
But you knew which ones in your platoon were trustworthy that way and which ones might not be.
Right. I knew there was a few that weren't trustworthy that way, and I wouldn't have sent them alone back. It didn't happen very often. We took prisoners individually. I don't recall ever taking an individual prisoner by myself. I was always in a group. It wasn't for me. I was never in a position where I was alone. I mean, I had men around me. I wasn't a point man, except on the case of this bridge. No, that was never a concern. And I, like you say, I knew that it happened. And I knew that it happened in our unit because there was bragging.
Really?
You know, not in my platoon.
But in the company?
Yep. And it was not that I wasn't there. I mean, it was just hearsay.
Yeah.
And I can't even recall who it was. I remember the distaste I had for it. And I guess maybe I had never seen what happened to our prisoners. I knew that they died. I knew we had men die. We never had anybody captured per se that I know of that was, until afterwards I heard, that were mistreated. I guess that happened, but I wasn't proof positive.
Did you ever have anybody in your platoon who broke down psychologically?
Oh yeah, and it's strange. It wouldn't be the men you thought it was going to be. a little guy in my 3rd squad. His name was Woody Cope, and he was from the hills of Kentucky, and he went to great pains to show me how to make moonshine. He did that for a living, I think.
Oh, uh-huh.
And he was a real hillbilly and a gunman. And he wasn't a leader. He was not even a good follower. I remember Willie always, he said I wasn't chicken shit, but he said I sure do have henhouse ways. That was kind of a running joke, you know.
Uh-huh.
I mean, any sergeant is chicken shit sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
And, but just one day he just went all to pieces. He just shaking and pleading and crying, and we were not in the, we were back, it wasn't right in the middle of it, all those things that happened that day. And I had to send him back, and I never saw him again. And I'm, you know, maybe he would have been all right the next day or two, but apparently not, or he would have been sent back up again. He wasn't the type that would shoot himself in the foot. In fact, I never heard of that happening. Only in movies.
Yeah. Mhm.
And he wasn't the only one. There was a couple others in the first days of Nenning that happened to. One of them I knew personally, and the other one was a sergeant in the 1st platoon, and I didn't know what the hell happened. I knew they were talking a little bit about it, but those things we had other things to think about, and he was already gone. And I had his address, and about 10 years ago I tried to contact him before we come to the reunion, and I don't know, he was kind of flaky, I guess, afterwards too, but something happened at Nenning that first day, and he must have thrown his gun down and run, and they just sent him back, and he never lived that down. He broke his marriage, and his family disowned him, and I called his home address, and his wife answered, and he had died in another town about a month before, and I talked to his wife and his son. They were ever so grateful to hear from someone who was his friend before it happened and had acted like he was forgiven. He was forgiven for all I... Hell, it could have happened to me that first day. It could have happened to anybody. And maybe if under different circumstances he would have gone through that stage and been as good as he had been before. It was just, I think the fact that there was such a reaction among his men, among his platoon, it might have saved some others from quite going over the brink. You wouldn't look at him and think that he was weak. I think in reading since then and following wars that they probably had a better way of handling it. And they didn't lose that the use of that man like we lost him.
And there was, I remember someone else telling me about the first person killed in the company in Nenning, the Mormon soldier.
Yeah, and I don't.
I think his name was Johnson.
Yes, and he was in another platoon, and I guess was he killed?
The story I heard was that he just walked into the square where the Germans were with his M1 in his hand, down, just holding it aside, and then was shot.
Well, yes, but he didn't die, did he?
I think he did.
Oh, it wasn't listed in our book. Maybe he is. Maybe I didn't. I haven't looked at that book for years. I didn't know him. I should have known him, but I maybe if I saw a picture of him at the time, but I wasn't aware of that until I heard it this time here.
Somebody told me that back in '87.
I see. No, I couldn't verify anything on that story.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure that it happened, and but I didn't remember his death, and I didn't remember. I thought somebody said here that he did survive it, but he must not have.
It's in the roster.
In other words, you're saying that he just wanted to die.
No.
Oh, well.
That was the story. I don't even remember who told me. It might have been Bob. I'm not sure.
Yeah, maybe so.
But it was.
Well, I wouldn't deny it, but
No.
I didn't. It
No.
didn't go through the crowd like a ripple.
you know.
You had a lot of other things to do too.
I
those
guess so,
first
you
few
know,
days.
and maybe we all kind of felt the same way there for a little bit.
Well, no, I never felt like I wanted to walk out in front of a machine gun, not without shooting back anyhow. I mean, there were times when you knew you were and being stupid, but you couldn't get there without going from here to there.
You were in the 3rd platoon then, all the way through.
All the way,
All
yeah.
the way.
Well, no, I started out in 2nd platoon before they got rid of the cadre,
Mm-hmm.
and then I went in 3rd platoon when we got into field training. When they started passing out chevrons, I went in 3rd platoon. Yeah, I got buck sergeant stripes in August of '43 and went home a proud sergeant.
Okay. Did you think at the end of the war in Europe that you might have to go to the Pacific?
Oh, we all knew we were planning. That was the division had good equipment. We hadn't been in very long. We were well trained. We were up to strength, and we were told that we were being scheduled to get on a boat, and that we were going to go through the canal, and that we wouldn't be going home. And they give out 10% furloughs to London for 7 days, prior to around the 1st of August. And by the middle of September, we thought we were scheduled to go. And so there was probably 20 men from the company that got on half tracks. I mean, on deuces and half, and met with other companies, and there was 1,500 men that went to England during BJ Day. It was a great place to
That'd be a nice place to be, wouldn't it?
Come in, Bill. It's do I have to go?
No, you go ahead, keep talking. What are you doing? I could make it like forward. We get over here.
Now, we're
Well,
about
we're
done.
talking about you, Bill.
You all done?
We're getting close to done.
Yeah, good.
I usually end up with a question that says, "Is there anything else you want me to know?" Any
I want to know I
experience?
made a mistake 7 or 8 years ago when I talked to you. You know, times I didn't talk to you long like this time.
Mhm.
I didn't
Right.
want to talk. But there was a young man that was come in April of '44, along with a lot of these other guys, and he kind of tied himself to me, and because he was put in my squad, and he was a brilliant young man, and enough so that he wanted to be up on. I remember taking him to a half track and taking a 50 caliber machine gun apart, putting them together for a half an hour, until he could do it too. And well, the next day he committed suicide.
Really?
Right. And it wasn't who I thought it was. I knew who it was at the time. He was an important young man. His name was not Carnegie, it was Kerrigan.
Kerrigan?
Kerrigan, Andrew Kerrigan III. He had been in ROTC in high school, and he had been his cadet colonel in ROTC in high school and junior ROTC. Then he went into ASTP, and that was him back, and he was just destitute from being moved to a high authority place in his ROTC unit to a PFC, to a private infantry outfit. I guess he just couldn't take it.
Couldn't take the...
Right, and then on an Easter morning of 1944, we were out in the mess line, and he blew the top of his head off in his shelter house right next to mine. I never saw him. I didn't know where the fire came from, and I knew there was some hollering and rustling back there. But there was a hole in the top of the roof and blood all over, and blood in the trench around it, and I'm probably the last one had much contact with him. I didn't know that he had a problem. You know,
It wasn't obvious that...
well, I sure couldn't see it. He seemed like he was very interested, and I know he would have liked to have been squad leader and maybe platoon sergeant someday.
Yeah.
And he probably was very capable. He was a short man, and he was a boy. But he also had impressed some people where he would have been cadet colonel, but even in junior arts. So that bothered us all for a while, but
to lose somebody like that.
Yeah, but that was the circumstances that happened. I remember a couple of the guys that came in with him from ASDP went back to San Francisco with him, and they never told what happened to him. Said it was a field accident. But
Yeah,
they
there's
were
no use.
no, there was no point. They had a beautiful home, they said, and beautiful burial, and a lot of rich friends, and had a hell of a background. Now, I never knew whether he was of the true Andrew Kerrigan that made the flight the wrong way, but I think there was a connection. Because I don't know whether his name was Andrew or not, but there was a Kerrigan
Yeah.
that flew to England.
Yeah, wrong way Kerrigan.
Yeah, wrong way, yeah. Anyhow, but I think this guy had to come from a real class family, and money. From what the guy said, that when they came back, they were treated royally, but it was under sad circumstances. Go ahead.
Yeah.
That's
So
it.
that was just,
Anyhow, what I told you wrong before is I always remembered his name as being Carnegie, but it
Carnegie,
wasn't.
it wasn't Kerrigan.
I only knew him for a couple of days, and at that time, neither one of the names. In fact, Kerrigan meant more to me than Carnegie. Might have been 100 million less, see, but,
Uh-huh. Right.
yeah. But it was that.
Anything else that you want to be sure I know?
No, I had, what I was coming home to, I was betrothed before I left, and got married to the same woman I'm married to now, about 4 months after I come back, and we're going to have her 50th in another couple, 3 months.
Congratulations.
I come back in January 46, and we were married in June of 46.
Congratulations.
Yeah. She's a very lovely mother of 7 children.
And you just picked up the farming and...
Well, yeah, I never did anything else after I come back. I did work for the Union Pacific Railroad for 9 months before I went in, because there wasn't that much to do on the farm, and I knew I was going to be going, and I thought there was an opportunity for me to come back. But when I come back, I didn't want to go back to the railroad. I would have had a good job in the headquarters building in Omaha, but I had friends that did that. My brother-in-law did it, and it was kind of a rough life. I enjoyed what I do. I enjoy it, yeah. It was probably easier for me because I come from a farming background. The farm was there if I could handle it. And but there was a time in 1960, my dad and I sat down, we talked things over, and we said, you know, we're not making any money. You're not going to have a life here, but it is the farm. What do you want to do? And I said, well, I sure don't want to do anything else, and the kids are coming up great, and if we can hang on to the farm, let's do. And we had lost a lot of money in the 50s in feeding cattle, and he was a good cattle feeder, but the prices were wrong. And he didn't have much money equity in the farm anymore, but I took over his loans, and things worked out, you know.
Did you make any use of the GI Bill?
Only, it's kind of like welfare. You know, at the time, the farmers could, we went to school once a week at a basement in a school, and we had an instructor there that didn't know as much as I did. And I drew $40 a week for 50 weeks. And I needed it, but I used it. It was $2,000. I suppose I learned something, you know. That was the object of it, and that was the part of the GI Bill that was available to me, or I could have gone away to college.
Right.
And I never resented, because I've been going to school all my life through extension.
Right.
You have it available to you, and you do it. I didn't need a sheepskin. We put all our family through school. Well, I wouldn't say those that went to graduate school, they did it on their own. And there was 3 of them that did that, and the last one is still paying his loans off. But they got through the first 4 years. We were able to do that. Our farm could do that. It's hard to do that now because it costs so much. It costs more than when we were sending ours through. And I hope that our kick is through. And I will help them some, but they got to help themselves. And our kids did too. They all worked, but we could pay them tuition, room, and board. And if they wanted to go out on Friday night, it was their money. And good Lord, I bought enough used cars. And I was a mechanic, and so were they, and they keep them running, and by God, they'd stay home. That was life, and I never had a car until after I was married, 2 years after I was married. I drove my father's old beat-up pickup until I could afford to buy a car in 1948.
Well, I thank you.
Okay, I thank you for listening.